So you may have noticed, in the previous section there, that the wireframe is very blocky, right? So a good tool to employ when you're creating your pages, graphic designers use often, as well as web designers, is using the grid. So the idea is that you design your entire composition around a grid, and then all the elements will fit in there. So for example, if you look at this, it's just like a mock one. See, like this is like kind of like a typical whatever site, and if you look, it follows a 12 column grid. So that's the typical number of columns that we use, is 12 columns, because that will allow for 4 sections, as well as 3 sections, as well as halves, and as well as halves, thirds, and quarters. So that gives us quite a bit of flexibility by having 12 columns. So some of the benefits of it is that by using the grid, is that most of your content is actually going to be rectilinear, right? So text is in blocks. Images are typically rectilinear. Your other media, video, even like embedded games or whatever, they're all squarish innately. So it just makes sense. They'll fit into a grid pretty well. It forces alignments. So alignment's very important in design. We want to make sure that it creates cohesion within the overall element. So if you're using a grid and you have these columns and they're snapping to the columns, you can automatically make sure that all the elements are aligned properly. So it works really well for that. It's easier to group elements into nice little blocks. So if you want to have association, you just put them inside the same block as each other. So as you see here, like this picture to the subtitle and the text, or the this call to action, and then these dots here for the slider, those sort of things. And then lastly, and the part of the reason why we'll be doing this as well, is that it works very well for responsive design, because what it allows you to do is that you can take those blocks and then move them around, either expand them, stack them, move them, however you want to do it. So my site, for example, uses columns and uses the grid. So like if this gets smaller, you'll see eventually the elements start to stack until they get to a certain point where they will then snap into 2 by 2. And I don't have it really set up necessarily that way, but you can have it that they get set up into 2 columns and then they go into 4 columns and so on and so forth. So it allows for a lot of juggling. If you click on this link here, which will bring you to the 960 grid system, you can actually see a bunch of examples of different websites and how they use a 12-point grid, or generally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. See, these are more. But they generally use the grid. Most sites that you will see will have some sort of grid. It's not to say that they have to. Sometimes you can have a really interesting design by not employing a grid. But most sites, so this one's 12 column. They say that on the top. That one's 16 column. So a grid's very common. So if you want to look and view those. And most websites that you're going to see, like I just showed you, but really obvious kind of competitors, right? Is that if you look at Apple versus Microsoft, they both clearly are utilizing a grid. You can see like here's 4 columns, and then they have the elements stacked on top of each other. Again, here's 4 more columns. Another section, you can see like these are obviously in a grid as well. And those elements, if you take this line straight up, you can see it follows right along and it goes right straight through. Okay. And the same thing here, you can see they have 2 elements stacked next to each other. So it's just a really common thing that all sites basically use, is the grid. And it's going to become even more important when we go to do our wireframe. And eventually when we use next week, when we start to employ Bootstrap, which is a responsive framework, because that's how it functions, is utilizing a grid. So you definitely want to use the grid. Basically, is the main thesis of this section.